Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, June 13th, and the Yankees continue to dominate. They continue to hold the best record in Major League Baseball. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, they're not even going on full throttle yet. I mean, there's a bunch of guys who can and should play a whole lot better. So really, the sky's the limit, Yankee fans. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our Mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. You can also drop us a line if you want to, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked which starting pitcher should be the Yankees' #1 trade target. And I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers about the DH rule and whether pitchers should hit. Also, he's the host or one of the hosts of the excellent Bronx Pinstripes podcast. Andrew Rotondi joins the show for a wide-ranging conversation you will not want to miss, and we'll go through the good, the bad, and the ugly from this last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Who was on deck when Aaron Boone's home run won the 2003 ALCS over the Boston Red Sox? Was it A, Jorge Posada, B, Jason Giambi, C, Hideki Matsui, or D, Kareem Garcia? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Well, since last we spoke, the Yankees won series against the Angels and Astros at home. They took 2 in Baltimore, the other 2 were lost to rain, split a doubleheader against the Tigers, took 2 against the Blue Jays, won the first installment of this season's Subway Series against the Mets, 2-1, and shut out the Nationals last night. So all is good. Now, we haven't exactly shaken the Red Sox off our trail, but their run of playing pretty much exclusively crappy teams is coming to an end. After today's game against the pitiful Orioles, the Red Sox fly out to Seattle to play the red-hot Mariners, then the Twins, followed by the Mariners again, the Angels, then they play us, and then 3 in Washington. So 16 of their next 19 games are against teams with winning records. And our path over the next couple of weeks is a little less treacherous. We get 2 series against the Rays and 1 against the Phillies. So hopefully by the All-Star break, we've gotten a little distance. But as I said in the open, the Yankees have certainly done the job as a team, but there has been a handful of players who have not fulfilled their potential, not even close. So now it's time to get into the good, the bad, and the ugly as we take a hard look at some of the individual performances of the past week and see who's pulling their weight and who is not. And the good is headlined once again, surprisingly, shockingly, by Mr. Sonny Gray, who pitched an absolute gem in Toronto a week ago today. 8 scoreless innings. He was efficient. He radiated confidence. He was throwing strikes. It was a fantastic performance. The Jays could do nothing with him. Now, as usual, the Yankees did not give him much in the way of run support. That game had no score heading into the 13th inning when Judge hit a 2-run bomb and then Stanton iced it with a solo shot. That was the hardest hit homer in the majors this season. But Gray retired the first 12 men he faced and the last 7, only walked 2 and had 8 strikeouts. So Sonny, in the last month or so, has given 3 great performances against the Royals, the Orioles, and the Blue Jays. 3 terrible teams, but, so what? You got to start somewhere, right? So good for him. Also good has been Miguel Andujar, who has effectively blocked Brandon Drury in AAA. Miguel leads the team with his .310 batting average and also leads the team in hits with 63. He has continued to show power and help his team win ball games. Andujar, in the last week of play, hit a sizzling .438 with 2 home runs, a double, 2 walks, 6 RBI. So Miguel Andujar has been an absolute revelation. And who knows? We may have 2 legitimate contenders for Rookie of the Year if this keeps up. Also good, dominant in fact, has been the entire New York Yankees bullpen. Now, Adam Warren is sort of still getting his feet under him after coming back from that back injury, and that goes for Canely too, but Chapman this past week, 4.1 1 innings, 0 runs. Chad Green, the same exact stat line. David Robertson, 3 innings, no runs. But Dellin Betances has looked absolutely great, and it makes me so happy to say that after really a year and change of incredibly shaky work. But Betances this week, 4 innings, no runs. So the bullpen is looking very good, folks. Looking bad has been Greg Bird, who for me, this is a make or break year with no more excuses. Tired of hearing about your feet. This is put up or fly away, Bird. This week, Bird is hitting 111, and it's getting old really fast. A couple of other guys underperforming are Tyler Austin, whose playing time has shrunk accordingly. Austin just hitting 143 this past week. And Stanton. I mean, yeah, he had the home run in Toronto, and he had a big one against the Mets, but at the stadium, man, he's just miserable. On the road, he's actually been really good. I mean, hitting 279, 929 OPS. That's beyond good. That's excellent. 9 home runs. But at the stadium, hitting 200 on the nose, OPS at 663, so 266 points lower at home, and 6 home runs. So I don't know if he's still worried about the Boo Birds or what the deal is, but he needs to snap out of it in the Bronx. But the ugly this week has one headliner, and that is Gary Sanchez, whose defense I've criticized over the course of this past season, but whose offense has now sunk to the bottom of the sea. This painful, protracted, ugly slump of Gary Sanchez is beyond ugly. It's hideous. It's grotesque. It's a slump to make grown men shield their eyes, dogs bark, and small children cry. I cannot remember for the life of me the last time Gary Sanchez managed to get the ball out of the infield. He falls behind every single count, and at that point, the at-bat is over. I mean, seriously, the only suspense with 2 strikes is whether he swings out of his shoes and misses a slider way out of the zone or meekly grounds out. Honestly, it's not even frustrating anymore. It's beyond frustration. It's really kind of a thing of wonder to behold how a hitter who's been so devastating in the past could be this bad for this long. But on the season, Gary Sanchez is now hitting 190, folks, 190, and I'm tired of people saying he's the best hitter on the team. A-Rod said that on ESPN on Sunday. Actually, no, he's not. His OPS, if you compare it to the guys that get regular playing time, is dead last. He's giving us absolutely nothing, and I can't for the life of me figure out why he hasn't been dropped in the order and why we have 2 of our most consistent hitters, Andujar and Torres, all the way at the bottom. No idea why Boone is doing that. I mean, why would you not want to have those 2 guys getting potentially an extra at-bat every game or so? So look, as I've said before, this segment that I do, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I believe has magical properties. Guys I've killed in the past, whether it's Betances, Gardner, or Gray, have risen up out of the depths and made me look silly the following week. So Gary, please make me look silly. I need that to happen. Yankee Nation needs that to happen. And this slump is at least partially flown under the radar because the Yankees are winning. But God forbid if we go on a losing streak. I mean, that media spotlight is going to go from like a dull flicker to a ferocious glare. And Boone sat him last night, and I think he's going to sit him tonight too. So we'll see what happens. But this has gone on way too long, and it's time to get it together. Now, some runners up to my good section are Brett Gardner, who hit 278 this past week and had a huge home run in Queens. Gleyber Torres also has been good. He also went yard in Queens, made some nice plays in the field, including a really nice caught stealing last night on a great throw from Romine. So really, it's been great to see the baby Bombers carry their share of the load. More than their share, really. It's fun to watch, and I think there's a lot more on tap. Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers by Andrew Rotondi, who hosts the Bronx Pinstripes podcast, along with his partner Scott Reinen, which for several years now has been one of the go-to destinations for Yankee fans. They often release 2 or 3 episodes per week. I'm a subscriber on iTunes, and I highly recommend it. Andrew, it's great having you with us today. How are you?
Good, Joe. Appreciate the shout out there. Yeah, it's been going on since 2015. I can't believe we've been doing it that long.
Now, before we get to current events, and there's a lot to get to, I'm wondering how far back this goes for you with the Yankees. When and how did your Yankee fandom begin? And then how did you get involved with writing and podcasting about the team?
Well, like I'm sure many young baseball fans, it's their father that gets them into it. My dad was always a gigantic Yankees fan. He's actually even more psychotic than I am when it comes to the Yankees. So that's where I got it from. I'm actually not from the New York area. I'm from Rhode Island, which is Red Sox territory, quote unquote. So kind of unusual that I was such a diehard Yankees fan, although it's not like Massachusetts where it's 99% Red Sox fans. Rhode Island's probably like 70-30 split, but my dad's side of the family was always Yankees, so that's how it came about.
Now, we all have our first great Yankee moment. It's either a great win or a great play, that moment when we truly fell in love with the team. Now, I'm a bit older than you, so for me, it was a 77 World Series victory, which I watched as an 8-year-old. But for you, Andrew, what was that first incredible Yankee moment that you remember that really locked you in as a fan for life?
Well, I'm going to make you feel old, but it's okay because I get made feel old when we have listeners tell us that their first memory was the 2009 World Series. But my first memory was the 96 World Series run. And I vividly remember laying on the living room floor of my house as my dad was watching. And the first game, maybe it's only because I've seen this play so many times, but the Jeffrey Mayer play and the ALCS against Baltimore is really like the first memory I can think of watching the Yankees. I was 8 years old.
Now, at Bronx Pinstripes, you've got a whole team over there of writers and editors and social media people, and it's not just a podcast. You guys blog as well, so it's an extensive operation. Now, how is this team assembled, and do you guys have day jobs, or is this a full-time thing?
We send out a bat signal, and they just collect. No, I wish it was a full-time job. Both Scott and I have full-time jobs, and Scott just had a baby, so he's got 2 full-time jobs right now. But we have quite a few writers. It's evolved over the years. Scott was the original founder of Bronx Pinstripes. It actually was not called Bronx Pinstripes. It was called NYY Universe back in 2011, and very quickly we received a cease and desist letter from the Yankees because I guess they have that on lock. And we switched it to Bronx Pinstripes, which I think was a good switch. But I had been writing on the website since 2011. I had been doing a Tumblr blog back then out of college, just sort of passing time. And then the podcast didn't happen until the 2015 season. Scott and I decided we've got this platform. Both he and I just loved to talk Yankees. Figured let's put some mics in front of us and see what happens.
Andrew Rotondi is our guest this week on Bronx Bombers. All right, let's get to the here and now. So on the one hand, we have the best record in baseball. On the other hand, just looking at the offense for now, we have a bunch of guys who aren't firing on all cylinders, not even close. I mean, Gary Sanchez heads that list. Now, Didi had the big home runs last night, but up until then, he wasn't hitting for much power at all since April. Stanton remains inconsistent. Bird not doing much of anything yet either. Is this just the normal degree of slumps over the course of a 162-game season, or are there guys that you're really concerned about as you look at this Yankee lineup?
Well, I think it's telling that you mentioned all that stuff, and I agree. Gary Sanchez has been lost at the plate with the exception of maybe 3 weeks in the middle of May where he looked okay. Didi has not been good since April 30th. Stanton has not lived up to the hype. He's been okay. I think people make it out worse than it really is with Stanton. But all of that has happened. 3 key cogs in this lineup, and they still have the best offense, the most productive offense in baseball. So I'm not worried about the offense.
Well, it's kind of an odd situation because 2 of our most productive hitters, Miguel Andujar and Gleyber Torres, are hitting at the bottom of the order. So, Andrew, what's your take on Boone leaving those 2 guys down there? Is it a good move in your opinion because it keeps the pressure off the rookies? Or have they shown enough moxie at this point where it makes sense to get them higher up in the order so they see more at-bats?
I see both sides of it. So Gleyber Torres should not be batting 9th. In my opinion, he would be batting higher. Against righties, I would bat him 6th or 7th. I know it's not that much higher than 9th, but it's something. It gets him maybe a plate appearance more per week, maybe 2 plate appearances more per week, which in the long run adds up. Against lefties, I would have Gleyber Torres leading off. I hate Aaron Hicks leading off against lefties. I know Hicks has some advanced metrics that say he is underperforming this year. He's got hard hit rate and all that kind of crap. But the fact is the results have not been there really for Hicks, and I think he's a better left-handed hitter than he is a right-handed hitter. So Boone batting him first against lefties is just not something I agree with. As far as moving Andujar and Gleyber up in the lineup, the problem is like who are you moving down? And I guess that's a cop out, but at the same time, I don't expect Gary Sanchez to slash 100, 150, 150 for the rest of the season. Like he's going to hit. So Gary Sanchez is not moving out of the middle of the order. other guys who you mentioned, like Didi, he's moved down since April. So if you're Boone, I could see it being tempting, but for the time being, I don't see him moving guys around, except, like I said, Glaber needs to move up.
Okay, switching gears now to pitching. We've got our bona fide ace in Severino, obviously. But after that, we run into some inconsistency. I mean, Sabathia has been mostly good, but you wonder about his durability. Tanaka's now out for probably a month. Gray has looked better of late, but mostly against bad teams. Montgomery's having Tommy John surgery, and then Herman, who I like, is still a work in progress. So, Andrew, looking at this starting rotation, what's your level of concern here? And do you think it'll be sufficient to trade for a single starter before the deadline, or do you think Cashman maybe needs to go beyond that and get two?
I would rather go out and get the top pitcher available than get two mediocre arms, because I think my concern level, to answer your question, is high. I think after Severino, there's a ton of question marks. And now with Tanaka blowing out both his hammies, can't even run 90 feet in a straight line without hurting himself, is on the DL. Like, he could be out till after the All-Star break. And Sonny Gray, Sabathia, all those guys you mentioned are big question marks. We don't know what we're going to get. So they do need another pitcher. And their rotation and the team is good enough to make the playoffs, maybe even good enough to beat the Red Sox in the AL East. But I don't think it's good enough as it stands now to go to the World Series. So they're going to have to get another pitcher. And I would rather Cashman take the approach of get the top guy on the market. I don't know who that's going to be, because it seems like there's not a ton of guys available right now. Maybe there'll be more available in a month and a half when the trade deadline comes around. But I don't want like some of these guys who are rumored, like J.A. Happ or some of these other middle of the road guys that, frankly, I don't think are going to be much of upgrades over what they have now.
Okay, so besides Happ, looking at some of the starters that should be on the trading block in July, Cole Hamels, Tyson Ross, Michael Fulmer, is there one guy that stands out to you who we should really go after, or do you think any of those guys are capable of stepping in and adding some consistency to this rotation?
I think Fulmer's still going to cost a ton. And I'm not sure that Cashman's willing to give up the prospects it's going to take to get Fulmer. Like, would you trade Andujar in a package for Fulmer?
No, I wouldn't make that deal.
Okay, I agree with you. I would not trade him for Fulmer. I would trade Andujar, but not for Michael Fulmer. So unless Cashman's willing to part with that level of package for Michael Fulmer, who is controlled, so he's got that going for him, then I don't think that's going to happen. I look at a guy like Cole Hamels, who is definitely past his prime, who is a lot of money, but I don't think is going to cost you a ton of prospects. And I think very well could pitch to a number 3 or number 2 in this rotation, which would be a huge help.
Well, I'm curious, Andrew, why you're down on Jay Happ, because if you look at the numbers, he's actually having a little bit better of a season than Hamels, walking fewer guys, fewer home runs given up for about half the cost. So why Hamels and not Happ?
I think Happ would cost actually more because it's in division. And I think the Blue Jays are not going to just give the Yankees J.A. Happ. And are you like, I don't want to slightly overpay for J.A. Happ. I understand that Hamels and Happ's numbers are similar. I think it's a great point. But I think also we've seen Hamels have some really good starts this year against good teams. I know his I think 3 of his 4 best starts of the year came against the Astros, the Red Sox, and the Yankees.
That's true. His numbers against our likeliest playoff opponents, Boston, Cleveland, and Houston, are excellent.
I could almost see a scenario where Hamels comes over and is motivated and rejuvenated and pitches better, similar to what happened with Verlander last year in Houston. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be Justin Verlander, what he's been in Houston, because he's maybe been the best pitcher over the last calendar year of the last 20 years. So that might be asking a lot, but I could see him pitching better for a playoff contender, maybe the Yankees, maybe some other playoff contender, than he has for the last year for the last place Texas Rangers.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. And the fact that he's pitched well in big games against tough opponents could definitely be an indicator that you're right about that. Now, with the bullpen, it's been a little shakier at times than Yankee fans would like, but on the whole, it's performed well. Especially recently, we've seen major strides from Dellin Betances over last year and over earlier this season. When he gave up that home run on his very first pitch in Toronto back in March, we're all thinking, here we go again. But he's really come around. John Jonathan Holder has had maybe his best season so far. Chapman's been solid. Are you confident, Andrew, that this is a championship bullpen, or does Cashman maybe need to look at a guy like Brad Hand, big left-handed reliever for the Padres, to make this even more of a lockdown pen?
You're right about Betances, and if you take out, there's 2 appearances early in the season. One was against Toronto that you mentioned where he allowed like 4 stolen bases in the inning. And then a week later in Detroit where he gave up 3 more earned runs. So those 2 appearances kind of bloated his ERA early in the year, but he's been really good. Now, I still don't trust him in a second inning of work, and I still don't trust him to hold on a runner, but he has been more like the Dellin Betances in 2015, 2016 than the 2017 Betances. So that's good news. I think the bullpen is good enough. There's so much talent. And we haven't seen Canely really pitch this year. I think he's not fully healthy, so hopefully he can get healthy. I know that's a big question mark. Warren is still battling back from injury. I think there's enough depth in that bullpen to be good enough to take him to a World Series. I would much rather Cashman get a starting pitcher than a bullpen arm. Now, last year, he did both. He went out and got Robertson and Canely, and he also got Sonny Gray. So who's to say he's not going to do both again this year?
That's Andrew Rotondi. You've been listening to part 1 of that conversation, and you can hear part 2 of that interview on the next episode of Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Who was on deck when Aaron Boone's home run won the 2003 ALCS over the Red Sox? The answer? D. Kareem Garcia. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this: which starting pitcher should be the Yankees' #1 trade target? And make no mistake, a deal will happen, especially with Jordan Montgomery having to undergo Tommy John surgery. In fact, given how inconsistent the bottom of our rotation has been, I wouldn't be shocked to see 2 pitchers acquired by Brian Cashman, but 51% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said Cole Hamels should be our primary trade target. 19% said Jay Happ. Michael Fulmer also got 19%, and Tyson Ross just 11%. Now, Twitter only gives you a maximum 4 options when conducting polls, and there's been a few other names thrown around in this regard, including Chris Archer, Patrick Corbin, and Madison Bumgarner. I'll briefly give you my thoughts on all these guys before giving you my choice. Now, obviously, there's 2 sides to every trade, and if the Rangers want, Glaber and Andujar for Hamels, then the answer's got to be no. But for our purposes, I'll talk strictly, about the merits and risks of each pitcher. And let's start with Hamels, who absolutely will be on the trading block. The Rangers now sit in last place, 14 games under 500. And there's a lot to be said for Cole Hamels. Yes, 34 years old, but always been very durable with both the Phillies and the Rangers. His year so far I would characterize as good, not great. 3.86 ERA, 1.235 WHIP. That's good, but, he's given up 17 home runs. That's more than Tanaka, folks, who's given up 16. So that's definitely a concern. On the other hand, against 3 likely postseason foes for the Yankees, Boston, Houston, and Cleveland, Hamels has been very good. 2.56 ERA, striking out over a batter per inning. And, he's been through the wars with a number of stellar postseason starts, not including Game 3 of the 2009 World Series when the Yankees knocked him around pretty good, but World Series MVP the season before that, and interestingly enough, he was relieved in that Game 3 loss to the Yankees in 2009 by another of our possible trade targets, Jay Happ, currently of the Toronto Blue Jays, another team on the road to nowhere, 15 games out of first place. And by the way, both Hamels and Happ's contracts are over at the end of the season, so no big commitment, but Hamels is making a lot more than Happ. Hamels will earn $22.5 million this year, and Happ a little less than half that much. So that would give the Yankees more breathing room as far as the tax threshold. Of course, the Rangers could agree to eat part of Hamels' contract, but the truth is Happ may be just as good, if not better, than Hamels. Also a salty vet, 35 years of age, career 3.94 ERA. Like Hamels, a left-hander, his numbers are pretty much the same as Hamels this year, slightly better actually. Just 10 home runs given up, fewer walks as well, which has been a trend, for Happ for a few years now. He was pretty wild early in his career, but has become an aggressive strike-throwing machine. Now, make no mistake, he's not an ace, but in my mind, considering who's available, he could be a really good 2 or 3 guy in our rotation for a lot less money than Hamels. Now, right-hander Tyson Ross of the Padres is an interesting case. He was a really good pitcher from 2013 through 2015, missed 2016 due to thoracic outlet syndrome, had surgery, and then the Rangers last year took a gamble on Ross, which did not pay off. He was bad, but he's had something of a resurgence this year. Numbers pretty much the same as Hamels and Happ, but making far less than either. He's on a 1-year deal worth just $1.74 million, so peanuts compared to those two. His ERA is an impressive 3.13, and he's been a ground ball machine. He's sort of like a right-handed version of Sabathia when he's on. Great slider, and of course the Padres are another team that's in the cellar and due for a rebuild. So I have no doubt that Ross is going to be traded considering how cheaply he can be had for. So a little more of a gamble than Hamels or Happ as far as, coming off a really bad injury and then a bad season. But since like the other two, he's in the last year of his contract, actually the only year of his contract, and would be a rental, maybe the Padres are willing to part with Ross for a non-blue chip prospect or maybe Brandon Drury, who's been effectively blocked by Andujar. So that's Tyson Ross. Now, Michael Fulmer of the Tigers, like Patrick Corbin of the Diamondbacks, who we'll get to, is a guy that's been on Cashman's radar for a while now. Like Ross, a right-hander, but just 25 years of age, and would be under team control until 2023. So that's good. What's bad is the Tigers know that that's good and will demand blue-chip prospects in order to fast-forward their rebuild. So we'd have to give up a lot more. Now, what makes me nervous is Fulmer's ERA has gone steadily up from his outstanding rookie year when it was 3.06 2 years ago to 3.83 last year, and now it's 4.40. Fulmer is not having a good year, and it may be due to the fact that he had surgery in September on his ulnar nerve. So to me, of the 4 guys I named on my poll, Fulmer is the biggest risk, in that you'd have to give up a lot more for what's essentially an unknown quantity, and I would stay away, frankly. And I'd also stay away from Chris Archer of the Rays, another guy whose ERA has been steadily climbing the past few years. Right now it's at 4.24. He's not had a good year. I think his reputation is inflated due to a few good years, a while back. And I think, Archer is highly unlikely, and that's a good thing, especially given the fact that he has 3 years left on his contract. Now, it's a fairly reasonable contract. Archer makes considerably less than Hamels or Happ, about $8 million annually. So that's something to consider, as the Yankees most likely do not re-sign Sabathia next year, and Montgomery won't pitch until after next year's All-Star break at the very earliest. So these are all things Cashman has to be, considering. It's not just about this season. These deals have long-term implications as well. So look, all these guys are talented pitchers with varying levels of risk. But before I tell you what I would do, I want to dispense with this idea, which is a fantasy, that Patrick Corbin of the Diamondbacks or Madison Bumgarner of the Giants is going to be wearing pinstripes this season. That's not going to happen. Now with Corbin, there's a lot of mutual interest, to be sure, and he's a free agent after this season. So I think the chances are excellent that he could be a Yankee next year. But the Diamondbacks right now are sitting in first place in the NL West, and they're not going to be dealing their most effective starter, who leads the team with an ERA of 2.87 and also leads the team with 105 strikeouts. So Corbin is a guy that Yankee fans should be legitimately excited about. He's posting career lows in ERA and batting average against, 188, which is incredible. And Bumgarner, who I love, just forget about it. The Giants, they did struggle early after Bumgarner broke his hand in spring training, but, he's back now, and the Giants are now just 2.5 games out of first place and will not be dealing their franchise player to the Yankees in this universe or any other. So of the guys that I think are possible, Fulmer and Archer make me nervous. I'd say no to those two options, and my preference would be to deal for J. Happ. We shouldn't have to give up the farm for a rental. He's got better numbers, not by much, but better numbers than Hamels or Ross, and he's got postseason experience. So that would give us a rotation of Severino, Happ, Tanaka, Sabathia, Gray. Now, a month or so ago, when Gray was just awful, I was thinking we'd have to deal for 2 starters, and I still think that might happen, and we could actually afford Happ and Ross most likely, but I don't think Cashman is going to do that now, with Gray showing definite signs of a resurgence. So given the fact that Hamels, Happ, or Ross would be rentals, I wouldn't be heartbroken if Cashman traded for any of these guys. It's low risk, and they're all serviceable starters, but of those 3, I like Happ the best, and if I was Cashman, that's who I'd set my sights on. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Paul in Mineola. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or leave us a message at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Paul writes, I am beyond furious that Tanaka is now in the 10-day DL due to the National League keeping this idiotic rule of the pitchers having to hit. Nobody likes to see it, and I don't care about managerial strategy. If the National League had the DH like the American League, think of how many injuries to pitchers could have been avoided over the years. What are your thoughts on what should be done about this? Well, Paul, the short answer is we should have the DH in both leagues. And no, this is not because Tanaka got hurt. I've held this position for years. I think having pitchers hit is bad for baseball, and I got into it on Twitter with a guy named Brian, who gave me the usual argument about how pitchers hitting adds more managerial strategy, and I told him the overwhelming majority of fans do not watch baseball for managerial strategy. They watch in order to see professional athletes excel at what they do best, which for pitchers is not hitting. And by the way, there's pinch hitting in the American League too, and plenty of strategy. So that argument does not hold water. Now, a couple of other points that Brian made also don't fly with me. He said, quote, the same thing could have happened if Tanaka had to get quick off the mound and field a bunt, which is true, but that's like saying, well, it's okay to text and drive because you can get killed in a car accident without texting and driving, right? I mean, of course, but the chances increase dramatically, just like when a pitcher has to run the bases and bat every 5 games, that increases the chances of injury dramatically. We saw it with Tanaka. We've seen it with Adam Wainwright in St. Louis. He popped his Achilles breaking from the batter's box back in 2015 and missed the entire year. It happened to Chin-Ming Wang, who tore a tendon in his foot running the bases in 2008, lost for the season, and the next season it caused problems for him as well. Jacob deGrom hyperextended his elbow on a swing back in May. It happens. I mean, not infrequently, and there's no need for it. I mean, pitchers pitch, hitters hit. National League pitchers are batting 118 on the season, and then if you factor in American League pitchers who have to hit in National League ballparks, pitchers as a group this season are hitting .097 with 0 home runs. This is not compelling television, folks. This is an irritating bore. It ruins the flow of games, and by the way, the DH position this season has hit a total of 163 home runs, the most of any position. So anyone who'd rather watch a pitcher strike out than see that, you can't even argue with it. It's just so obtuse. There's no rational basis for not having the DH in both leagues. Now, traditions aren't worthwhile just because they're traditions, okay? I mean, human sacrifice was a tradition for centuries, but we got rid of it because it's an abomination. And so is pitchers hitting. Or to use a less, extreme example, a baseball example, foul balls were not strikes until about 1905 or so, right? So you had hitters with these marathon at-bats, and it was bad for the game. So they changed the rule. And, National League zealots will say, well, the DH is just a gimmick. People still say that, believe it or not, it's a gimmick. Come on, man. It's been around since 1973, when Richard Nixon was president and people wore bell-bottoms and watched Kojak and had pet rocks. The DH has long outlived its gimmick status. And frankly, the way it is now, it makes the National League less competitive. American League pitchers have one less thing to do for the most part, so they can relax when they're not on the mound, and maybe that keeps them more fresh, and free agents who might be thinking that they'll spend the latter years of their career as a DH might be less likely to sign with a National League team. So, Paul, I'm with you, man. There's simply no rational argument for pitchers hitting, and they should get rid of it once and for all. And if the National League is that greedy that they don't want to adopt it because they don't feel like paying a DH salary, then we should get rid of interleague play, which frankly is kind of overrated in my opinion. Certainly not worth the risk of losing a pitcher for an extended period of time because of some dopey tradition that doesn't make any sense. It's really dumb, and they should absolutely get rid of it. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, and please do follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well, but most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.